Yeah, g'day TryPod family. Welcome back to the TryPod Live with Winny and Clarkey. We're here to preview everything, preliminary finals, hand out some best bets, mixed matchups, everything you guys love. Before we get to all that and more, we've got to go to the chief, the director, the CEO, the boss man himself. Winny, how are you going, mate?
Doing pretty well, mate. Exciting time of year. Last week we won one best bet and the other one was pending, although we did lose the mixed matchup and the same gamer. Look, the top four teams after 27 regular season rounds are the four remaining for the prelims. We had home advantage prevailing last week. So far, these finals, looking back, we've actually had zero upsets. Week one of the finals, the Roosters were slight favourites over the Sharks. You wouldn't call them winning an upset. We have had some close calls, as we know. In fact, the first three elimination finals of the series came down to the absolute wire. It wasn't until New Zealand last week winning emphatically over the Knights was the first team that was in a do or die that actually won well. And of course, when we get to this weekend, there's no tomorrow promised for anyone. We do have two double-digit favourites, which is quite unprecedented on both sides of the prelims. I'd like to know straight away, as I can see everyone getting in the comments, are you picking an upset? Let us know. It is hard to pick one. I think a lot of people will be expecting a Broncos-Panthers final, but it doesn't mean there isn't a lot to discuss. I've deep dived both games. I've thought about how an upset could occur. There's a bit of injury uncertainty around all the sides, really, especially a lot of key playmakers. And I've really tried to think about how the games could play out, biggest advantages, strengths, weaknesses. I've got a mixed matchup where I think there's some value. I want to talk about the way the games could be played. We've got a bonus segment that's going to tie into Dally M Awards with a twist. So plenty that I can't wait to chat with you about, mate, and get our followers to interact with us on as well.
Yeah, it is going to be a big show now. On the way of best bets this week, we do have the Melbourne Storm to be eliminated this week from the previous show, and that was $1.80 odds. Any other best bets this week?
So I'm sorry to disappoint people. I'll put that on the screen. As I will say, we've kind of averaged 3 best bets per round this year. I think we've had about 90 best bets on 29 weeks, right? So 3 out of 8, you're kind of having a best bet, not quite every second game, but maybe once every, close to 3 out of 8 or once every second or third game. And so can't expect to have one every finals game, although we have had 5 so far. And I'm putting up on the screen last week's best bets where we did scrape home with a win over New Zealand versus Newcastle in the first half. It was exactly 20 points, but also because that stage of elimination bet is the 5th best bet of the finals. And I'm glad to say we're 4 from 4 so far, and it's pending. And admittedly, Hughes got scratched after I shared this out. It hurt the bet a bit. And you guys know how it ended. I mean, we needed a mark that wouldn't have been out of place in the AFL finals by the brick with tries with a minute to go for Melbourne to get to the prelims. Now they're there. We need them out. And that will just take a Penrith win, which luckily for us is $1.20. So you could actually hedge that. You could have $5 on Penrith to make the grand final. But as far as the best bet record goes, it'll just be judged on the result on Friday night. And outside of that, nothing else has really grabbed me, although I want to explain why when we get to the matchups. And I do have an angle on a mixed matchup I will share. In fact, I will actually just say full disclosure, there was one other bet I was really close. It would have been a best bet a week ago, to be honest. And that was a week ago, I was looking for Panthers-Broncos grand final because I thought if we can get that $1.80, I would have loved to play that a week ago where anything could happen in week 2. You don't know what kind of misfortune could hit those teams that have to play in week 2. The highest price I could find was $1.70. It still would have been a great bet because now a Broncos-Panthers final would pay, if you pair them up, you're paying like $1.50. Although isn't it funny, no key players really got hurt last week for the winners. And it's actually a team that was idle that had their best player rushed off to hospital with a training injury to his finger. So you never know when something could occur out of the blue, and that could still be the case in the days between this pod and the grand final. But again, is that a foregone conclusion? I want to tell people no. $1.50 outcomes get rolled each and every week in this sport, so that's why I think there's a lot to discuss.
Yeah, $1.50, and you need 2 results to go your way. It's been such an interesting final series, not from the perspective of crazy upsets, but we get to the prelims here, and I kind of feel for both games we're not really saying who are you tipping. Is it Panthers Storm or is it Broncos West? We're kind of saying, are you going to pick the upset or are you going to go bold and predict an upset? And I just feel as soon as you get in that mindset with rugby league, funny things happen. It's a strange old sport, isn't it? We've got plenty to get to. Before we get to all of it, we're going to hear from the CEO of Top Sport, Tristan Merlihan. He's got some exclusive market insights for us.
G'day everyone, Tristan Merlihan here from Top Sport. Only got 4 teams remaining in the NRL. We're down to the preliminary finals and they are 2 lopsided affairs, a little bit different to the AFL. So you battle to find too many reasons to back in either the upsets. It looks like it's going to be a Penrith-Brisbane grand final, but when it gets to the last 4, anything can happen. We know how good Bellamy is in these situations, and the Warriors, they've been surprising people all year. So the market suggests the Panthers will be very hard to beat. $1.18, 12.5. The line has actually come in 1 point. And then the Broncos, 126 and minus 10.5. That's actually moved in 2 points from when we opened it. So there has been a little bit of support for both sides at the plus. Looking at last week, we almost had a massive result there where the Roosters almost got the chocolates against the Storm. There were a lot of multis running through Melbourne across all of the different facets. They obviously just got over the line at the end, but they didn't cover the spread, which for us, there was a good push for the minus late. So we did still get out of the game with something. And then fortunately for us, we laid the plus in the Knights game, so that one turned out to be okay, which I would have thought going into the weekend, the 2 favourites progressing through would have been an ugly weekend, but we managed to get out of trouble. So looking forward to how we progress, looking at the futures books, we'd be one of the only operators I'd suggest that have got Penrith as winners for us at the moment. They're the $2 favourites. The Broncos, they've been our worst way, along with the Roosters, basically all year. We laid them at the start of the year at $21. They're now into second of favourites to win the comp, and as I said, they're likely to get through to the finals. Just having a look at the top point scorer, that's the other market. We've got a little bit of action. Nathan Cleary's been best backed with us. He's into $1.55 to get the chocolates with Adam Reynolds. Second pick at $2.75. One side note, we've got the Dally M obviously coming up. It's very disappointing we're not able to offer markets on that. It's it's one of our biggest nights of the year, the Brownlow, on Monday this weekend, and to not be able to do something similar on the Dally M, I think it just takes away from the neutral fans wanting to watch the event. I'm a big rugby league fan and I find it very, very hard to tune into the night. So it's unfortunate, but it is what it is at the moment. So hopefully you back a winner over the weekend. Enjoy the Dally M if you're watching it, and if you've still got a team left in the fight, hopefully you guys can progress through to the grand final. Good luck over the weekend, and of course, gamble responsibly.
I've got 2 thoughts and 2 takeaways from what Tristan said there. Now, I wonder, had we have gotten a Panthers Roosters and a Broncos Knights preliminary finals, I don't think the lines are any different. Do you see it that way as well?
I agree. They'd be very similar. So we were always set for kind of big favourites in these prelims. What other takeaways you got?
The other takeaway was the Dally M medals, and I just think it's such a shame that we can't have a punt on it. Some idiot years ago ruined it and leaked it to his mates, and this has happened in other sports. A UFC coach is currently under investigation by the FBI. One of his trainers, the market moved like this when he was like a $2 underdog. By the time the fight started, he was like $1.20. There was that much movement on him. Sure enough, he goes out in the first minute, does his knee. Now, the UFC doesn't freak out and say, no one can ever bet on it again. They just place that person under investigation and move on. I really wish we'd done the same, because it is really fun trying to predict who's going to win that medal and having a punt on it. Let's jump into...
And Ryan, so I'll respond as well. Ryan said Roosters' line would be slightly more. I should agree with that. Like, because of how beat up the Roosters are, even if they had beaten the Storm, and then you'd think even more highly of the Roosters, I think you'd give them even a little less chance of overcoming Penrith than what Melbourne does. And of course, Melbourne are hoping to get back Jerome Hughes. So I think that's a fair call. As for the Knights, I think they were seen on an equivalent level to New Zealand. And of course, in that alternate universe, you got pulled up, Clarkey, in the comments the other day for saying in another world, or I think there's a world where, I don't know, if you say something too often, people will get you. That's fine. But in another world where the Knights get through, then our opinion with them would be elevated, and they would have been on like an 11-game win streak. And I still think they'd be like a 10.5-point underdog in Brisbane. And I wanted to respond to Luke's comment there. He said he grabbed that Quinella Broncos Panthers at $1.92 on Sportsbet but I want to understand what he means by via a multi, like, because you couldn't have multied the 2 head-to-heads. Just curious. I'd be interested on the learnings there. Luke says, was far better than Knights. But this is if the Knights had beaten the Warriors. You have to realize the line was like 4.5. And that wasn't really saying that the Warriors are far superior to Newcastle. It was more about the home advantage. And that's going to be key when we talk about these matchups, because in the third week of the finals, you always have a team with home advantage and with rest advantage as well.
Final question from me before we get into our round specific. Do you ever want to see a world, to go back to that saying, where the losers of this game play off for third of this round?
It's so funny you say that, because I was actually going to throw a mythical matchup at you later. But no, I think that's insane. And I don't even think they should have it. Like Rugby World Cup's on right now. And even the Soccer World Cup was last year. And this is the worst game of the season to lose. I feel like even if you get to the grand final, Parramatta fans can still look back with some joy at last year. But losing in the prelims, so brutal. And this is the most brutal sport of all. And to back up and be asked to play again, no way. So that's fine. You don't need a third place playoff. They can both be equal third if they want to be.
Let them get on the beers and start enjoying those. Unless there's a medal up for grabs, like the Olympics or something, third place really doesn't matter too much to me. Let's jump into the preliminary finals. We kick it off on Friday night at 7:50 p.m. We're at Accor Stadium for the Panthers v Storm, and the line is set at -12.5 in the Panthers' favour, who do welcome back Jerome Luai and Isaac Tungo. That means Jack Cogger and Luke Garner both move to the bench. For the Storm, they have named Jerome Hughes, and at this stage, it's reported he will play. It is something you'll need to monitor day to day, though, beyond this podcast. Coates remains unavailable, so Remus Smith stays on the wing. Tyron Wishart moves to the bench, and Bronson Garlick drops out of the lineup. Now, I know who you're going to tip on in this one based on the Storm bet for them to bow out in this one. But I wanted to know from a best bet perspective, were you ever interested in the line there for either side?
I will say, if I was playing the line, I would be playing the favourites, and I would be looking at Penrith 13+, basically at the best price you could find. The biggest topic, I think, to begin with is the health of the halves. So I expect they all play. It's such an important game. But if any of the three in doubt would miss, I guess most likely would be Hughes. He needs to hit top gear in captain's run, which will be tomorrow, to ensure his spot on Friday. And from what I heard, he was only running at 60% in training yesterday. So it's not sounding great. Similarly to the Warriors last week with Johnson, you've got the replacement on the bench in Wishart. So I think even if you're not sure, you risk it. And then worst case, Hughes would have to be replaced. You play with 16. And I guess on the Penrith front, they also have their replacement on their interchange in Cogger. The difference is that Penrith don't have to risk Luai. I mean, they know they can be very comfortable with Cogger. They've looked more than capable with him in the last two runs out on the field. And they also are such a strong favourite that they don't need Luai in the sense that they can win without him. But I suppose you could also say maybe the Panthers do need Luai to be the best chance to win the grand final. And you're almost better off to test the shoulder this week. And if it gives out, you can still win rather than, I guess, take that unknown a week deeper. If you win with Cogger, then you don't really know what, because you can never test something truly until it's in the, real heat of battle. But of course, you got to factor that up with what the doctor's advice is and that extra week of healing for what that is worth. But the fact that the Panthers have named Luai, I don't really see the need to play games. So I will presume he's going to play. And then it leads me to Nathan. Can you imagine if he was scratched from this game, the biggest game of the year so far, trying to win 3 in a row and just jars his finger at training? And if it needed surgery or something, if he couldn't play, I'm sure he will, but it could be hampered. This is a guy that's got as skillful a passing game as anyone, loves that one-handed show. So I kind of could see Nathan be tested a little bit, but it's anyone's guess to what degree that could hamper him. When I think about those injuries, I will put it this way. If Hughes is either scratched between now and Friday or plays but clearly, can't perform properly or has to be replaced, I would basically put the red pen through Storm. I'll say Storm can't win without a strong contribution from Hughes. As for the Panthers halves, like if they were both hampered, if Luai and Cleary played and both were hampered to a degree, maybe one had to be replaced, I think that's the biggest chance the Storm have. I don't want to be harsh, but I'm kind of thinking Cleary's out there, he doesn't look himself, Luai's, underdone. Suddenly you start to say, if Hughes is all right, Munster and Hughes could outplay the Panthers halves. You look at the rest of the spine. Meaney was man of the match last week. He's kind of playing like a poor man's Dylan Edwards, which I mean is a compliment. And then Harry Grant has to win the hooker head-to-head against Kenny. So if you were to tell me Melbourne gets the upset, then I think that scenario probably involves Cleary or Luai, if not both, being diminished. But I want to throw back to you. How do you see the injuries impacting this clash? And I know you won't write off the Storm, but I want to hear from you if you've really thought about how the Storm could win this. Where could they get the upper hand?
I've actually got a really strange reason why I think the Storm could be a chance here. I'll start with the injuries. On the dislocated finger injury for Nathan Cleary, all reports are that he'll be absolutely fine to play. Now, I can't speak for being an NRL player, and I'm not even sure which finger he dislocated. I did dislocate my left pinky playing Oztag once, actually going for a try. Luckily, it was on full time. I went to the hospital. They kind of just pulled it back into place. And the same as Nathan Cleary, there was no fractures or anything to the bone. And I was able to lift weights at the gym the next day with it strapped up. So a little bit different to playing professional sport, of course, but just to kind of add a little bit of context for our listeners, I suppose, it is painful, but absolutely in a preliminary final, he's going to play. I'd be legitimately I'd offer 1,000 to 1 odds if Cleary doesn't play.
Well,
that's it.
So was it, if it was just a dislocation, like usually the trainer will just pop them in. I just thought the fact that he went to hospital meant like it could be something more serious, but basically he's been cleared from the scans.
So when you dislocate your finger in rugby league, usually they'll take you to hospital and do a scan before they pop it back in, because if there's a fracture in there, they don't want to be pulling it.
But if it's live in a game, they don't.
Well, I suppose that is a little bit different, right? Because after you pull it, you can get the pain-killing injection and you strap it to such a large extent. But at training, when you have the benefit of being precautionary, the best method, I suppose, for a dislocated finger, from my experience around footy, is to get the scan first, just to make sure. In a game, there's that much adrenaline, everything's happening. You are right. They don't usually have time to go and get a quick scan and sort it out. So it is just the old, is it going to go back in? If not, we'll have to take you off. On Luai and Hughes, where it gets interesting for me is I think the risk for both is mainly around re-injury. And we do see both sides carrying a halfback on the bench in Wishart and in Jack Cogger. But I just think in this one that, as you said, Panthers can win without Luai. He probably doesn't have to play. And that line probably moves a touch, but nothing too drastic, I wouldn't think. Whereas for the Storm, we've already seen them without Jerome Hughes take on Penrith at Penrith's home, being Bluebet in round 23, I believe it was, when Jonah Pezzett was there. And they got utterly pumped. They didn't really look themselves. The rest of the spine couldn't get going. Panthers shut them down absolutely. So I think Hughes has to play, and therefore they do have to really weigh up the risk of re-injury, because Panthers can rest Luai and still go to the grand final and bring him back. Storm probably can't afford to do that with Hughes. They need him to play. The reason why I give Storm a chance to finish off before I hand back to you is actually the fact this one's at a core stadium. Now, I know that sounds so weird, but I think it creates a big game atmosphere, which brings out the best of big game players like Cameron Munster and Harry Grant. Think of some of the clutch moments these guys have come up with in State of Origin. Munster last week, Grant scooting to score and win the game for the Maroon side that couldn't win in the 2020 series. Storm have actually only lost one of their last 6 at a core stadium as well. So it has been a happy hunting ground for them. I think the atmosphere will bring their spine into it and give off big game vibes. So although I'm sure that sounds a little bit strange, that's the reason I'm going to give the Storm a chance. But I'll go back to you to continue your analysis.
I thought about Origins as well, and I thought about Queensland winning against the odds and players like Munster and Grant, and that's what this game is. Not to mention that Penrith, they are half the blue side, and that's the kind of upset it would take. I feel like the disparity is even greater than what it was, those Queensland sides. They weren't given much chance in 2020, but they still weren't, 12.5-point underdogs. I've also heard the line out of Melbourne this week. I've heard Welch say a couple of times, and then others have clung onto it. Well, Penrith beat Melbourne both times this year, but the Storm had a lead in both games. Well, let's just investigate that a little bit more. One was in Melbourne with no Nathan Cleary. The Storm were favourites, and got blitzed. Yes, they did lead by 2 tries. They got blitzed and lost by 20. And the second game was more recently, admittedly, no Hughes. They lost 26-6. They scored the first try. You're clutching at straws if you want to say, like, if only they held that lead. Yeah, but it wasn't close. Okay, so let's start there. Of course, prior to this year, there have been some close matchups between these sides, and it's an awesome rivalry, and they know each other very well. And the one that I want to talk about, the one that comes to mind for me is 2021, because that's the last time these sides met in a prelim. And in 2021, it was Melbourne who were the reigning premiers. It was Melbourne who got the week off before the prelim. And it was Melbourne that were big favourites. They were 7.5-point favourites at the time. And I remember thinking about that game clearly. It was a fair line because Penrith had to fight a war the week before. If people remember, they won something like 8-6 against Parramatta. They were busted. It actually came out after the grand final because we know how it ended. Penrith went on one that like half the team shouldn't have been playing. They were busted. So that was an incredibly brave win that Penrith got over the Storm. And how did they do it? I remember the game. I think Melbourne had a couple of players out in the first 20 minutes, like Brandon Smith. I think Welsh might have copped an early head knock. Anyway, Melbourne was suddenly short a couple of forwards. Penrith got a bit of a lead and really just clung on in that game with pure determination and grit. So I bring that up because the roles are reversed here. The odds are reversed. And you have to wonder if Melbourne can do what Penrith did to them 2 years ago. But I don't know. The difference is Penrith are clearly the stronger team, whereas 2 years ago, they were really even teams. It was just more that Melbourne was favoured because of the advantages and the intangibles, and they were a healthier squad at the time. Penrith's far stronger to begin with, then gets the advantage of playing at home. Yes, not the true home, but still Sydney, Melbourne travels, and of course, the rest advantage. So it all adds up. I would still lean towards Penrith 13 plus. And what it comes down to, the biggest edge is that Melbourne does not have a premiership winning pack. You know, Kaufusi, the Bromwich brothers, Brandon Smith, they're all left in the off season. And fair enough, like those players haven't gone on to really greater things, but the Storm haven't been able to replace that either. And Welsh is back from injury, not quite the same player. You know, didn't get a look in for the Maroons, whereas before he got, I think he did an Achilles. He would have been close to, you know, knocking on the door for the Kangaroos. And then Loiero, Katoa, King, they all have promise, but none of them are rep level right now. The Panthers pack are all rep level. So it's the same shortcomings that I pointed out before the Broncos match. They remain to me. How does the Storm get on the front foot enough to create enough opportunities for the likes of Munster, Hughes, Grant? I can't see it, and I feel like you got to probably score 3 tries to beat Penrith minimum. I don't know how the Storm get there without doing something special. So that's why I could only lean to Penrith not only progressing, but covering the line.
It's such a difficult one. I look at this Storm pack and I think they probably have looked short a middle forward all final series. At their best, they probably don't get into such a war with the Roosters, and they certainly don't lose. I believe it was 26-0 to the Broncos. And in those games, I do think the common theme was their forward pack just isn't as good as it has been in previous years. Whereas you look at this Panthers forward pack, we've only seen them one time this final series, but they did absolutely blow the Warriors pack out of the park. And even the Warriors players admitted to their coach at training that week, we're off our game. Like, they just took us off our game. We couldn't get back into it. I had to look at that 2021 final series winning, and just an observation as to how much this Panthers team has continued to improve. So in the first week of finals, they won by 6. They lost by 2. Yep. To South. They then beat the Eels by 2. They then beat the Storm by 4. And then they beat the Rabbitohs by 2 to win the premiership. Then they go into the 2022 final series looking to go back-to-back. They win the first round against the Eels by a 21-point margin. Then they beat the Rabbitohs by a 20-point margin. And then they beat the Eels by a 16-point margin, all 13-plus victories across the board. They come into this final series, week 1, huge margin, 13-plus. And I do get the feeling they're going to do that again here. Look, the only really chance you can give the Storm is if you're just feeling a wild upset. Like, I really feel like we haven't had an unexpected result in the final series yet, and typically we can expect a couple. I guess I can reference that 2021 finals loss to the Rabbitohs in week 1 by the Panthers as something unexpected. We haven't had something like that in this final series. So you'd have to have that gut feeling. The safe tip here and the smart tip, looking at all the stats objectively, is Panthers 13 plus. But I just wonder if Hughes plays, is that enough to give the Melbourne Storm a chance here? Now, I don't think they'll win, but is it enough to give them a chance to remain within that line there? It's a Storm side that hasn't been at their best this final series, where we've only seen the Panthers in week 1. And for all intents and purposes, in my opinion, they were pretty flawless against the Warriors side, who's shown last week. They're pretty game. Now, the Panthers have won their last 7 finals game in a row. Their last loss was to the Melbourne Storm in the Parramatta Eels in week 1 of the 2021 final series. They've won 4 of their last 5 against the Storm. The only real factor I could come up with for the Storm was, if you believe a call will create a big game environment, and that brings their Origin caliber players into it. If Hughes plays, I could play the Storm +1.5, about +12.5 rather, but even so, I'm just going to play it safe. I think you got to go the Premiers here, the back-to-back Premiers and the Penrith Panthers. So my official tip for this game will be Panthers at the line. Any final thoughts from yourself on that?
So to clean up what you said, I know you can recall many Parramatta wins over Penrith. None of them were finals games, though. They got so close in 2021. But the last time Penrith lost in the finals was to Souths.
Yep.
Of course, they rematched in the grand final. And I was going to reference that too when I talked about Adam Reynolds later. I think Hamish says it well there. The Tigers beat the Panthers. Anything can happen. And while that was a regular season game, it's a bit different. Look, that was an 18-point underdog getting the upset. This is a 12.5-point underdog. Stranger things have happened, but I've just never been a believer in making a bet because you feel like an upset's due. You know what I mean? If that's the best reasons you can come up for the Storm, then as I said before, you may be kind of reaching a little bit there.
It definitely feels that way. But regardless for this one, don't forget, we'll be cooking up a same game multi thanks to Better. And our Better sign up link is in the show description here live, and if you're listening as a podcast. And of course, if you do sign up, make sure to message the TryPod page on Facebook to let us know. But before you sign up to any bookie, think, what are you prepared to lose today? Set a deposit limit. For free and confidential support, call the number or visit the website on the screen. And those details are also in this show's description if you were listening as a podcast. Now, that's our breakdown from the first game. We'll have a Better same game multi for that one. We'll talk about the mixed matchup after the second game, and we can see all the live comments coming through, sending your guys' analysis. We love and appreciate that as well. We're going to pause before we get to the second game. We're at the 27-minute mark. We're going to go through Dally M predictions. Now, we're going to do this one of 2 ways. I'm going to give who I think will actually win the Dally M positions of the year and the medal. And I've challenged Winny to come up with the best players from 2023 using bottom 9 teams only. Traditionally bottom 8, now bottom 9. So I'll kick us off with the fullback selection. And I've got Reece Walsh here as my best fullback this year, but he will be ineligible due to being suspended for the Dally M. So fullback really is up in the air. In terms of the best fullback, I'll go with that. It was Reece Walsh this year. I think other options are Dylan Edwards, Kalen Ponga you could go, Scott Drinkwater, Clint Gutherson had a great season. And I feel like I'm forgetting someone as well. There was a lot of great fullbacks this year. But if you want my outright best fullback this year, it was Reece Walsh. He came to the Broncos on a relatively cheap contract, around the $400,000 mark, and absolutely stamped his mark on this team in Origin. And it's just gone from leaps and bounds in his career. I think he's been the best fullback this year. Who did you go from bottom 9 sides?
I went the hammer with honourable mention to Jaden Campbell. Probably didn't play enough games. I was also looking at Dally M. In fact, I think we can speed it up. I think you can do your Dally M position picks. I'll just comment if I had anything different, and others can do the same. And then I'll just whiz through my Dally M positions for players that didn't make the finals, just on top, just because I felt like nearly everyone has got the same picks for Dally M. So you want to, you go through your positions, and people can let us know in the comments if they've got anyone else.
All right, let me roll through. So for my wingers, I went with Jermaine Osako and Dallin White-Tenny-Zalesniak. Wingers really hotly contested. You could have the Knights boys, you could have Brian Toto, and they're all great selections. But if we're talking form this year, DWZ needs one more try to equal the all-time Warriors try scorers, and Jermaine Osako went from reserve grade to leading this competition in tries and points super, super impressive. In the centers, I did have Dane Gagai and Herbie Farnworth when I did this post on my page about a month ago. Everyone pushed back on Dane Gagai. I've had a closer look. I'm going to go with Stephen Crichton and Herbie Farnworth, particularly towards the end of the year. I think Stephen Crichton picked up his form when he started to realize I'm at the doggies next year, unfortunately. And Farnworth has genuinely
sorry to interrupt you, I don't think Gagai was the best center on his own team, to be fair.
And a lot of people did say that. So I really had to go back to the drawing board and think about that one. And, it's probably one that I did get wrong because I've changed it now. Herbie Farnworth, this is a guy that led the NRL in post-contact meters at stages throughout this year and has been very, very consistent defensively. 5'8", I've gone Cameron Munster. I thought Cody Walker was my pick for most of the year, but I thought he fell away just a little bit too much post-Origin. And the challenge for Cody moving forward will be, how does he manage a full NRL season, including rep? Because in previous seasons, he has also fallen away post-Origin. My halfback is Sean Johnson, and he is also my outright pick for the medal, which is really, really embarrassing. If you guys saw my preseason prediction, I thought with Volkman, Tamati Martin, and Dylan Walker, and Luke Metcalf there, a new coach, I thought he'd come and say, look, SJ, you're chewing the salary cap and not doing enough. You're out. How wrong was I? SJ's been awesome this year and is my Dally M pick. 4 props, no one will push back on this. I've got Payne Haas and Fanua Blake. I think they're clearly the best 2 props this year. And then there's that next category full of your Tinos, Tarpanys, James Fisher-Harris's, etc. But Haas and AFB are clear. Hooker, Harry Grant, another one that's relatively clear. Like Appy Coruscant, if he was still on the Panthers, probably would have won with the form he's in, but you just can't win Player of the Year from the team that finished 17th when you're the captain. So I have gone with Harry Grant there. My back row, I'm with David Fafita and Hamoli Olakawatu for my picks there. Other picks would include Britton Nikora. I did see that Liam Martin was named the Players' Champion back row, Winnie. I'm not going to disagree with the players, but me personally, you can't be the position of the year when you started there 12 times out of a possible 24. You only played 50% of games in that position. And my lock is Isaiah Yeo. A lot of people have Patrick Carrigan. I'm sticking with Isaiah Yeo. I think he was just as good this year as previous years. So that's my team of the year right there. And I'll go to you now. I'll scan the comments while you speak.
Yeah,
and,
I didn't have much. In terms of the actual, I didn't have much disagreement with that. Although I would have gone Carrigan, would have gone Liam Martin, second row. So I've probably gone more chalk or more conventional, where you're maybe slightly more controversial with those picks. That Lindsay Collins would be an honourable mention for prop, but you can't go past Haas and AFB. Collins, yeah. And just on your prediction of Johnson, you got it wrong, mate. Like, you got to learn from Gus. You got to repeat the correct predictions 20 times, not the wrong ones. I feel like you owned that incorrect call a month into the season. But I still actually saw you getting roasted on a page just the other day for that call because people drag it up. I made a bold call 2 years ago. It was 2 or 3 years ago when a couple of high-profile halfbacks changed teams. It was Reynolds signed for Brisbane, Johnson signed for the Warriors, and everyone was going on about, Reynolds behind this Broncos forward pack, he's going to be perfect. He's going to elevate them to contenders. And I said, I think Johnson will be a better signing than Adam Reynolds. And look, the thing is, I probably wasn't even right because the Broncos would never take that back. They're perfectly happy with Reynolds. But here we are. Everyone had written off Johnson, and I was saying he could be reinvigorated for the Warriors, and he could turn out to play better than Reynolds. And as it happens, 2 years later, he's probably winning the Dally M, very well deserved. So, look, I just thought for saying a bit off the reservation, I said, what if you're picking Dally M's, but only players who missed the finals, just for a bright spark, a little bit of hope for those who support teams who didn't have a good year. I think your Dally M fullback would be Hamiso, thought he was unreal. My Dally M winger would be Izako, of course, leading point scorer for the and leading try scorer, and didn't make the finals. Johnston still had a great year. It wasn't really his fault that Souths failed. Penasini was probably the best centre for me of any players who didn't make the finals. The best performing 5/8 of the year from 9th to 17th, there weren't that many. I'll give it to Matt Burton, and I don't think he had a great year, but I think he's still such a great player with so much promise and was still solid. Halfback was really easy. I thought DCE had a phenomenal year, and it wasn't his fault that Manly fell away. Props, I'll give a shout out to a couple of teams that came last and second last. Thought Yuto Kamanu still had a great year. Blake Lowry still had a great year. Hooker, Robson, you probably got to give it to him, got into the rep arena, although Marshall King was awesome. Olakuatu, you're talking about him for the Dally M's team of the year. So, of course, in my bottom 9, he's going to be my second rower. And then my lock, do you want to give it to Ruben Cotter, who was man of the series for Origin, or Cam Murray, who still was really good? It's just we take it for granted with Souths, and they underperformed. Utility, do they still give a utility, Dally M?
No, they do full 13 now instead.
Okay, so I would have gone maybe Ray Stone. I would have gone my bottom 9 coach of the year, Wayne Bennett. So there's a bit of a Dolphins bias maybe. And rookie of the year, if it was bottom 9, probably Jacob Preston. But another player who I thought was really good this year was Tallis Duncan. Another small ray of hope for Souths fans.
Yeah, I'd probably go Jareen Buller for my bottom 9 rookie of the year.
Oh, that's a great pick, actually. I probably whiffed on that one too.
Okay. Other players, I think Latrell Mitchell was actually solid for a lot of the year. Clinton Gutherson, Scotty Drinkwater for the Cows, maybe Adokar. Did you say DCE for halfback, or did you go?
Yeah.
No, you did go DCE. Between him and Ben Hunt there. Dave Fafita, Tino, Moeki Fotuaika with my Titans bias. They were awesome. Cam Murray has to be there. Dylan Brown would have been there if not for suspension. I actually, where I'm getting those names from, I actually am planning a post on my page. I want to look at making the best possible bottom 9 team versus the best possible top 8 and see who'd win. And it's actually pretty scary how evenly matched these sides are, despite, some being all the way in a preliminary final and others being.
Well, I picked a full bottom 9 teams, 7 teams. I'll put it on the screen there. So, yeah, I had Mo, Tino. I tried to share the love a bit and pick players, have every team represented. But that would be these are players I all think played outstanding, just on teams that underperformed this year. But interested in other people's thoughts. We just threw in this bonus segment because we had a little bit more time, although the truth is we've gone so in-depth on the first prelim and we plan to on the second prelim. The pod's not going to be any shorter. So at least no one's shortchanged. But should we jump into the second match, Clarkey?
Let's do just that. It's the Broncos v Storm. We're at Suncorp Stadium on Saturday at 7:50 p.m. Now, previously, prelims had been played at 4 p.m. on Saturdays, and the NRL did try to get this time slot moved as New Zealand are currently 2 hours to the right. I mean, this will actually kick off close to 10 p.m. in New Zealand, which is a little bit unfair, I thought, for their fans. This line is set at minus 10.5 in the Broncos' favour, who have no changes, and the Warriors also have no changes. Do you like either line here straight away?
Look, I do have a lean. I want to actually give the first word of this preview to Nakul because he's got a multi. Again, you've got less markets to choose from, but we're talking line and total and who we think is going to progress. Of course, Nakul's going to give us some try-scorer angles, and he's got a try-scorer multi, so let's have a listen to that one.
Hey everyone, it's Nakul from Wiki. I hope you guys are pumped for the prelim finals this weekend. Look, I'm going to go against my usual style. I'm going to go pick a couple of wingers and throw out a multi this week. So Brian To'o and Selwyn Cobbo, both really good value on Bet365 according to our odds comparison tool. They're both around $1.83 to $1.87. So that multi should be paying $3.42, roughly about 10% higher than what it's paying at most other bookies. So get on, guys. Google Wiki, Linktree to check out our free previews, our Discord, our content. Good luck. Enjoy the weekend.
Good stuff from Nakul there, the founder of Wiki. So on this game, Winnie, you're not going to look at try scorers. You're going to look more so at a lean to the line. Is that correct?
Sorry, I was just reading. Literally, Luke in the comments is in my DMs. I wanted to try and get the clarification on how he got that $1.92 for the Quinella because I thought people watching would be interested as well. And I'm seeing it now. He multied Brisbane to make the grand final $1.31 with Penrith to make the grand final $1.47, which is awesome. I'm just kind of wondering when was Penrith $1.47 to make the grand final? I feel like you would have had to do that multi before week 1 of the finals, which then is not. It's not. Now. So then you got $1.92 because now Penrith to make the grand final is $1.20. So that's great. You're obviously happy to have that in your pocket, but it's not the same bet if you did it before week 1 of the finals. But I just wanted to check because I'm always interested when people get awesome odds, awesome bets. We want to know how because that's what we're all about. So we've got then Nakul. He likes, who's he gone? To'o into Cobbo. Is that right?
Both great picks.
For this one. And they're both around even money on the two favourites. It's hard to knock. Look, at the start of this show, I think I talked about injury concerns for all teams. So to clarify, for New Zealand, I'm talking about Johnson. I know he got through the game last week, but we discussed in the recap, he didn't have to push it to full throttle. So I feel like it's still a concern because he will have to this week. And obviously you can re-aggravate an injury like that. And then for Brisbane, don't worry, I don't want to alarm any Broncos fans. I don't have any inside information. I guess I just thought to myself, you got, two of their best players, the two most important players, Reynolds and Carrigan, did both miss time just before the finals. And in particular, Reynolds has a history of being susceptible. And I think back to the 2021 grand final, which you brought up, Reynolds carried a groin injury into that game. And I always think back to, he had a conversion to tie the game, and that's money for him. And he, did the groin injury just restrict him from curling that one in? Maybe we have a different universe, to use the phrase again, or a different world where Souths won that grand final and where Reynolds would have actually won a grand final on the turf at Suncorp Stadium before then moving to Brisbane. And now he's trying to take the Broncos to the promised land. Look, Carrigan should be fine because he was absolutely relentless. He was an animal in week 1 of the finals. So even if he has got a foot issue, we might find out later. I swear every final series, once teams get eliminated or once the season ends, the coach says, this guy had needles, this guy needs off-season surgery, this guy shouldn't have been playing. We don't always know. So at least we understand Carrigan was held out of a couple of games before the finals. So there's an issue, but I'm not going to doubt what he can bring to the table. This matchup is similar to the previous one in a lot of ways. Obviously, the home team has that big advantage of being fresh. The opponent has to travel. Last game was interstate. This game's international travel. We've also got the clear better team based on what we've seen all season long, is the home side. So you add it all up, you understand why you've got a double-digit favourite. I think one difference in terms of the home crowd, I know that it favours Suncorp favours Brisbane. I will never doubt that. But I do predict there'll be a massive Warriors contingent. They always turn up and support New Zealand in Brisbane. And we know that up the Waz hysteria has taken hold this year more than ever. So I'm sure that game, which is basically a sellout, I'm sure that lots of local Kiwis were snapping up those tickets, probably a few traveling over as well. So let's talk about upset chances because I think the bookies are correct with New Zealand being a shorter price than Melbourne. And I thought one thought exercise would be to actually talk about what if New Zealand was playing Melbourne. So imagine if the NRL said, sorry, guys, we're actually going to scratch both prelims. We're worried they might not be competitive. We're just going to go Storm Warriors third place playoff this weekend in Brisbane. And then we're going to go Broncos Panthers next week in Sydney. We know that's what it's going to be. And that way you get 2 awesome games. This is my hypothetical world. Clarkey, I want to ask you and I want to ask the people following, if the Storm and Warriors were playing this weekend, and hey, it actually might not be crazy because that could still be the grand final, don't forget. So it could be a real matchup. But who would you take? I want to know, Clarkey. Storm Warriors, but it's in Brisbane, so it's neutral. Who do you take in that one? And can you lead into the biggest strengths that you think are in the Warriors' favour and whether they can apply that one in the real game as well against Brisbane?
Well, it's an interesting one because I think the Warriors' biggest strength is their forward pack, and that's also the Storm's biggest weakness. But I'd still take the Melbourne Storm in that one comfortably if Jerome Hughes was there. You referenced Suncorp as a neutral venue. I actually disagree. I think that's a home advantage for the Storm based on their recent results at Suncorp. They've only lost 2 there in the last 10 years. So I'd go Storm. If I had to lay a line and feel comfortable with it, though, I'd probably only go 5.5. Could go a converted try.
Fair enough. And then in terms of the Warriors, you talked about their strength being their forward pack. So can you lead into the Broncos matchup? And then how do you think the Warriors forwards can handle Brisbane, where their absolute strength are the men up front?
It's such an interesting matchup. I felt that although these sides are both in the top 4, the Broncos certainly had the harder draw this season. I actually Googled it while you were first talking there. Based on 2022 results, the Broncos played 14 top 8 opponents this year, and they actually had the toughest draw of any team. The Warriors played 12 and they had the 6th hardest. So it was closer than I thought. Both sides, well, for the Broncos, I've already said the Warriors' strength. I think the Broncos is similarly their forward pack. Once Haas, Flegler, Carrigan roll up the middle, they've then got the spine that's able to really capitalize on that domination up the middle. Where it gets interesting, right? When these two sides played in New Zealand earlier this year, the only time this year, Haas was out, Flegler was out, Carrigan was out, Walsh was suspended. So the two biggest strengths I've just listed for the Broncos, being their electric spine and their forward pack, particularly the middles, were all out, and the Broncos still got the win by 2 points. So I do heavily actually favor the Broncos in this one. Do you want me to go on a few more reasons for that?
Yeah, keep rolling.
Well, I just think they're better rested. They've got better form over this year, and they're at home. I just feel if you combine those three, the stage is actually set for a very dominant performance here. The sort of performance that actually gets us thinking that should Panthers get through the night before, Broncos are a genuine title threat at the end of this 80 minutes here. I think that the real question here is when the Warriors have struggled this year, and they will be tested in this one, there's no way they go to Suncorp and walk over the Broncos, in my opinion. When was the last time we saw the Warriors really tested and go on to win? I trace it back to round 25 against Manly at home. But again, a game with not much pressure as they already knew they were in the top four. Before that, I go to round 21 against the Raiders when Croker missed that conversion as they were mounting the late comeback. So the issue I have here is I know that the Broncos are going to press this side, and I haven't seen the Warriors react to that since like round 21 this year. Their run home was relatively easy. And then in the games that they did lose, they had players missing or rested. Of course, the Panthers game, they were just blown off the park. So you can't read into that too much. Where it gets extremely tough for the Warriors is this will be a sold-out Suncorp. Yes, there will be Warriors fans there, but Broncos fans will be there in higher numbers. As it currently stands, I just can't see a situation where the Warriors come out on top. I can't see how they respond to the adversity that Brisbane offers them because I haven't seen that from the Warriors in a very long time this year. And I don't think that's so much opinion. I think it's more stats, and it is a tough take. I'll pause and ask, do you agree with that or do you disagree?
I've got reasons why I think New Zealand can pull the upset here. I appreciate you like Melbourne, so you're kind of showing your hand, and I'll show mine too. If it ends up being a Warriors Storm, unlikely as it is, if that ends up being the grand final, I'm probably picking the Warriors, and you're picking the Storm, and opinions are divided in the comments too. I can see, Jeremy says they're Warriors players playing at their peak, Melbourne in decline. Of course, we don't know the context next week. Who gets injured, who gets suspended, and how does a team look in a win, right? So it's a hypothetical matchup, but I thought it'd be interesting just to see how people feel about both these teams. Here's another fact. Brisbane was only a 4.5-point favorite hosting Melbourne 2 weeks ago, weren't they? And now they're 10.5 against New Zealand. Now, admittedly, you got to give a couple of points, maybe 2.5 for the fortnight off in terms of advantage. So you have to increase the line. But the market would still suggest that Melbourne are better than New Zealand. And I don't agree with that because I really think that Brisbane's biggest strength is something that 90% of the competition can't stop. It's the forwards just get on a march. But the Warriors forward pack, I believe, can stop Brisbane potentially. When I look at, Fanua Blake can cancel out Payne Haas, basically. Like, how good is that battle and how good is it going to be watching them collide? And then Tohu Harris, underrated ball player as well, as is Paddy Carrigan, but Tohu Harris at his best can play on a similar level to Carrigan, over 80 minutes. The rest of the forwards, you can see strengths for both sides. I move to the spine. And firstly, you got to just mention how crazy is it that Reece Walsh used to play for the Warriors. That was one of the reasons I didn't have high hopes for New Zealand this year because I thought, well, they're downgrading at fullback. Imagine if he was still on the Warriors, as good as CNK has been. Clearly, that's an edge to the Broncos. Let's move to the halves and look at the parallels there. I already talked about how Reynolds and Johnson both, changed teams. They were in the twilight. Awesome story and homecoming for Johnson going back to the Warriors, but there was a lot of doubt. Like, I don't know which other clubs wanted him, and Souths wouldn't give Reynolds that longer extended contract. They're both 33 and arguably both in the form of their careers. They're both in absolute vintage form, as we discussed when we talked Dally M's. Either one, Johnson or Reynolds, can be a match winner and can be the man of the match in this game. You got the 5'8". Ezra Mam's had a better season, but that's partly because of the injury to Tamari Martin. But there's that extra wrinkle there that Tamari Martin played for the Broncos, so he knows his opponent pretty well. He can challenge Brisbane. And at hooker, you talked about Harry Grant's kind of your obvious walk-up 9 of the year, but how far away is Wade Egan? I think he deserves to be mentioned, especially when he's probably doing more with less. To the extent that no one expected anything from New Zealand this year, it's probably fair to say, though, that New Zealand has the better forward pack to Melbourne. But in this case, I think Egan's the superior hooker, as great as Billy Walters has been this season. I think both benches pack a punch, so I'm kind of going unit for unit. Let's look at coaching. Kevy's never been here as a coach. As a player, he's done it all. I think he's won it 6 times, right? But as a coach, this is the biggest game of Kevy's career. And it's also the biggest of Webster. He's a rookie coach, but he has won the last 2 grand finals as an assistant. So I would say by osmosis, he's been here before. He does know what it's all about. So let me throw it back to you. Where do you see the biggest advantages in terms of whether it's position groups or any other factors?
It's really tough to break that down, actually. I do think the Broncos have a halves advantage. I do think Mam is in better form than Tamati Martin, who was a little bit off the pace, I thought, against the Knights. He didn't contribute too much there. So I would give a real advantage there to the Broncos at 5'8". Ezra Mam just ties in very well with Adam Reynolds. And as you said, when we look at Reynolds and Johnson, it is very, very similar. I mean, it's so tough. I think the back lines are evenly matched. You probably get the Broncos. You know what?
I forgot to say, though, the centers.
That's
advantage
exactly
Brisbane.
Where I went.
I think wingers are pretty even. You like DWZ, Cobo, but centers more strike to Brisbane for sure.
Yeah, Stags and Farnworth, I'd take them every day over Berry and Pompey respectfully. So there's an edge there to 5'8" and to the centers. You give the edge to the hooker, as you said, in Wade Egan over Billy Walters, who has been handy. Could we say Warriors bench? Dylan Walker, pretty electric off the bench, as is Jazz Tavanga. Bailey Siren and handy, as is Josh Curran. That's compared to Brendan Piacura, Kobe Hetherington, and Keenan Policia. Probably have to, and Tyson Smoothie for their utility. So you probably have to give that advantage there to the Warriors.
You can. Brisbane's got a strong bench, but I don't think it's an advantage over New Zealand because New Zealand also rolls in deep. What about this factor, pressure? We talked about it last week. All the pressure was on New Zealand, but they passed that with flying colours. Now, some people will say that last week was the Warriors' grand final, and in some ways that is true, whereas Brisbane have really built their season, sacrificed the minor prem, as we know, to excel at this point. But it's all pressure on Brisbane. They're expected to win, and it's a failure if they use everything they've done over the last 29 weeks and bow out at home as a 10-point favourite. For New Zealand, it's kind of a free roll. They want to see what more they can do, but it's a magical season and they just want to ride it in. They can ride high in confidence. No matter what, New Zealand can hold their heads high. They know that this year's been a success and Saturday night is a bonus, and that does take a lot of pressure off New Zealand. And look, I'll probably say that the leadership is strong for Brisbane, the likes of Reynolds and Carrigan, the rep experience. A lot of these guys have played rep footy. I think they can carry that burden, and I don't think that Brisbane is going to fold under this pressure. I'm just trying to list a lot of reasons why I think New Zealand can keep it close, but I will be fair and say I haven't really listed any aspects of the matchup where I think New Zealand has a clear edge. I've really just talked about a lot of areas where I think New Zealand can hang in there. So I do lean to New Zealand with the start. I do believe that if they complete high, which will be the game plan, and they can really go toe-to-toe and they can take this game deep. And I believe New Zealand can stay patient. They've showed many times this year, even when a game hasn't gone their way, they stay patient. And even look at the Knights game last week. It's gone perfectly, 16-0. Now it's not. Now it's 16-10. And that pressure cooker is really turned up. But New Zealand weathers a storm and then blows the opponent away. And you just want to be within a score late, and then we see what happens. Roosters had no right to beat the Sharks after everything that happened during that game, but they're within a try and you score off a deflected bomb, right? Or last week, when a game's within a try in the last 5 or 10 minutes, any team can come up with a try at any moment and anything can happen. That's kind of the recipe for the Warriors. So I keep going back to, that's why they could win. And if I think a team can win, I'm going to lean there. That was the closest I came to a best bet. I just probably wanted that line to be a little bit longer. And I feel like because the Warriors won by 30 last week, it probably brings this line in. I think Tristan mentioned they opened 12.5 and that was already snapped up. So just feel like I'm not getting a great edge if I still jump on the Warriors line, but that's the way I'm looking. But what it comes back to is I'm not saying the Warriors are going to win because, as I said, I still think there's some areas of the park where you can say Brisbane's got the better outside backs and they're at home and they're fresher. We understand all that. So that's why I haven't come up with a best bet on this game. But because I believe in New Zealand more than the Melbourne Storm, I will get involved in the sense of my mixed matchup. But I want to hand to you final thoughts on this game, anything else you had noted, and then I'll share the mixed matchup.
Yeah, my final thoughts. I'll get to these points as quick as possible as we are approaching that 1 hour mark. I think for the Warriors, when you look at handling pressure, the first 15 minutes against the Knights, yes, I know the Knights brought it back within 6, but I just felt like the Knights were going to be out of gas late in that game, no matter what, with the amount of defense they did. With the Broncos, I did find a common theme throughout their season where roughly every 6 weeks, the pressure would build up and they'd fold. Round 6 at home, they dropped a game to the Raiders and lost their undefeated streak. We then go to round 12. Now, keeping in mind, they beat the Panthers at their home stadium in round 1. They lost to the Panthers by 11 points at home. Their next loss, full strength or near full strength, was to the Titans at Suncorp, a game they should not have lost coming off a bye. Now, from that game, they have actually won every game they've been at full strength. Their only loss was round 27, and then we saw them massively right the wrong in that loss the following week in finals week 1. So I think Broncos are more equipped to handle the pressure here. As for try scorers, I looked to Selwyn Cobbo, and I found he has 21 tries in his past 21 games at Suncorp, and Dallin Waitani-Zelezniak requires just 1 try to equal the club's all-time record. So if you do want to play it safe and pick some wingers, there's some options as to why they could score. Broncos' record against the Warriors is 4 out of 10 recently, and they're actually 3 out of 8 at Suncorp in recent games. So stats do favor the Warriors in that perspective. Final point for me. The last time these sides met was in Napier in New Zealand. Walsh was missing, as was Haas, Flegler, and Carrigan. Broncos still won there. Full strength, back at home in a season where both sides have similarly improved since that encounter. I've got to take Broncos here. I actually think Storm are a better chance of an upset this week than the Warriors. That's how confident I am. I'll take Broncos minus 10.5 for my official play, and I'll hand it back to you for the mixed matchup.
So we're kind of opposed. You give Melbourne a better chance of the upset on Friday night. I give New Zealand a better chance. So you want to be thinking along my lines if you're going to take this week's mixed matchup. I'll get to that in a second. Glad you brought up the prior encounter. There was just one between Broncos and Warriors. There's a reason I didn't bring it up, sorry, and that was because it was an Origin week, so I just kind of tossed that out. I don't think we learned much, but it's worth saying, New Zealand was a really good bet that week. I look back this season and I kind of look at something, that's a fine bet to have. New Zealand should have beaten the Broncos the Broncos without any Origin players.
And if the fans didn't streak, that's what hurt them the most. The fans
that certainly unsettled them a bit. New Zealand goes on to be a top 4 side, a top 4 side at full strength should beat anybody missing all their Origin players. So I digress, but that's probably another reason why I didn't bring that game up. So I heard someone say this week, New Zealand nearly beat Brisbane, so they know they can beat them. And I thought, you shouldn't use that Napier game as evidence in New Zealand's favour. If anything, Brisbane won in New Zealand without the Origin stars. Why wouldn't they win at home full strength? I think it actually favours New Zealand, but it was worth bringing up. So thanks for that. Lockie talks about the time of the game. I think the other factor is the AFL Prelim is in Brisbane that night, and it's on at 5:15 p.m. So you don't want to bring the game earlier and overlap and lose potential viewing audience of people that want to watch both games. So it's very unfortunate. I wish that it could be earlier for New Zealand fans. They deserve better. If New Zealand makes the grand final, there has to be a big discussion about pulling it a bit earlier on Sunday night. But look, I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen. Let me share the best bets. So Clarkey wouldn't be back in this one this week, but I still think there's an edge there. I'm going New Zealand to score more tries than Melbourne in the prelims. It's $2.15, max stake up to 200 on Toppy, and the promo code is TP Live if you need a Toppy account. Let's be clear, they must score more, and it's not points, it's tries. New Zealand was favoured to score more points than the Storm, so I couldn't get a price of $2 or better on that. For one reason, New Zealand are a slightly closer matchup, a shorter underdog, and also the total is a little bit higher on Saturday. But these are reasons in our favour as to why I think the underdog can score more tries. I feel like the Warriors, they can play free here, and they have threats. You know, CNK's had a great year. We talked about Egan. We know what Johnson can do and how in sync that right edge attack is for the Warriors. And even Tamari Martin, I think, offers something. Whereas I really struggle to see Melbourne. You know, they couldn't score against Brisbane, and we don't know the health of Hughes. And while I'm not sure about the half situation for Penrith, I do know that they're like a brick wall and that their forward pack has a significant edge that is not going to give Melbourne a lot of chances. That's why I like this price. And I do think this is a 50-50 or better. So 215 is a play for me there.
Well, my take on that mixed matchup, while you were talking there, of course, both sides lost in finals week 1. So they played exactly 26 games each. Storm averaged 4.3 tries per game. Warriors averaged 4.2. So there's no difference in what they're averaging. They are both against teams 1 and 2 in this competition. So you're right. It literally is a coin flip, and you're getting better than coin flip odds. So whilst I'm the other side to you in how I think the games might pan out, certainly when you break that one down from a statistical standpoint, there is some value in that mixed matchup. That's all I've got for the show tonight. Was there anything further from yourself before we close it down?
No, it always amazes me how we can fill this time up. Like, we even thought, let's add an extra segment for a bit of fun. I'm sorry. I apologize for people that we've gone 1 hour and there were just 2 games to discuss, but there was a lot to say and a lot to bring up and highlight about these clashes. Again, a lot of people are going to just go favourites head-to-head or favourites 13 plus. And I always feel like one of the games makes you sweat. That's usually how it goes. Like, one team might win comfortably, but tends to be a surprise. And whether that's a massive surprise and we upset the apple cart, to be honest, selfishly perhaps, I do hope that we get both favourites through, because I think that's the grand final we deserve. And we, of course, want a really evenly matched grand final. But I definitely think the favourites don't have it all their own way. I think that New Zealand might make it more interesting Saturday. Clarkey thinks Melbourne. Whichever way you're going, guys, best of luck. Enjoy the games, enjoy the weekend. And we'll be back. We will have to let people know. I would tend to think Sunday at some point. We'll just drop our live recap to react to everything that we catch. And then, of course, a week from now, we'll be previewing the final game of the season. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Appreciate it. I can see someone commenting up the pars. But for the pending best bet, let's hope that is the case. All right, cheers, guys. Lego.